April 26, 1986. A company town in northern Ukraine becomes the hottest hot zone in history. How that tragedy changed the world, coming up on today's podcast.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, today we're going to talk about Chernobyl and the nuclear disaster that happened there back in 1986. But before we get to that, there are a few short stories I want to cover that I haven't heard much about in the news and I think you ought to know about. There's a heat wave in Europe this summer, but in Spain, it's the terror threat that's got police services worried. Security and police services in Spain have dramatically increased their presence on the streets after ISIS made threats to tourist hotspots, to include the iconic Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. Recall that ISIS had targeted the Christian cathedral in the past, but when their bomb factory blew up with two of their bomb makers inside, they switched to a vehicle ramming attack instead. I was there to report on that terror attack. Investigations into the multiple terror attacks last week in southern Spain have revealed a terror cell of at least a dozen people who were planning catastrophic, coordinated attacks. Their plan went wrong when the bomb they were constructing exploded prematurely Wednesday night. Switching plans, one terrorist drove a rented van through a crowded shopping district in downtown Barcelona Thursday morning, leaving bodies strewn in his wake. Later that day, a second van, thought to be a getaway vehicle, was found. Friday morning, a second ramming attack in the coastal town of Cambrils, killing one and injuring seven. Police killed 4 terrorists and captured one more. Also on Friday, memorials sprung up around the site of the attack in Barcelona. Tens of thousands came to pay their respects.
The mood completely changed in the morning. Before it happened, it was just it was pretty much calm. Everybody was having fun, like a normal tourist destination until the attack happened. As soon as it happened, everybody at the beach started leaving. The subway on Ramblas, it was all completely closed. People weren't sure what was going on. It was just madness pretty much.
I'm Hannah Derras. I'm Moroccan. I've lived in Barcelona for 23 years. And this sign is in Arabic. It says that I'm a Muslim woman, but I'm against terrorism. It was very close. I saw lots of chaos. We were trapped in traffic for 4 hours. We aren't terrorists. We don't agree with these people. We don't understand why these things happen.
That afternoon, groups of protesters from both the far left and the far right attempted to capitalize on the tragedy and clashed near the memorials. The death toll from these attacks now stands at 16 innocent lives, and the people's response to this has so far been no tinc por, which means we're not afraid. But it's very clear that without the rapid response of local police forces, the death toll would definitely have been much, much greater. Now that plan, had it not been disrupted by a premature blast, would have involved multiple vans, explosives, rifles. This time, the ISIS-linked group, which goes by the name Al-Muntasir, has sent 3 threats aimed at Spain in the past month. The threats included a photo of the Sagrada Familia Cathedral. In response, the Spanish government has deployed over 40,000 police to tourist hotspots all around the country. All right, let's move on. I haven't really watched television for about 25 years. I think I could probably count the number of shows I've followed on one hand since probably 1994, when I made the realization I had a wife to support and nobody would pay me to watch TV. I've come to call it the electronic income reducer. But now, I'm not saying I don't ever watch it, but more like I prefer to spend my time in more engaged or engaging pursuits. However, we did sit down the other night and watch this HBO series on Chernobyl, mostly because I've had a chance to visit the site of that nuclear disaster twice in the last 10 years. And I was interested to see how well they dramatized the event. And I wasn't disappointed. The whole series was extremely well done.
does matter is that to them, justice was done. See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
No, Chernobyl is on fire. And every atom of uranium is like a bullet, penetrating everything in its path. Metal, concrete, flesh. Now, Chernobyl holds over 3 trillion of these bullets. Some of them will not stop firing for 50,000 years.
Tell me how to put it out.
You are dealing with something that has never occurred on this planet before.
Cut the phone lines. Contain the spread of misinformation.
What will happen to our boys?
The pain is unimaginable. In 3 days to 3 weeks, you're dead.
You can see him, and you cannot touch him. Do you understand?
What happened on the night of the accident?
Asking the right question will get you the truth. There is no truth.
What happened there? What happened after? All of it. All of it. Madness.
Now, I've heard people on both sides of the political spectrum saying this is either an indictment of socialism or somehow of the Trump administration, but I think it's really more of an indictment of bureaucracy in general, no matter what form it takes or who controls it. Now, I first traveled to Chernobyl in 2007 when I was doing research for one of my novels called Meltdown. I spent about a week in Ukraine visiting villages out in the countryside that hadn't seen a foreigner in living memory. It was really fascinating. I also took a tour of the dead zone around Chernobyl, and it was one of the more memorable experiences of my life. Okay, we're just coming down off the top of the building, 16 floors, and we had to get off there quick because he said it was 120 microradigen of radiation up there. So we just walked up 16 floors of stairs, now we're going down 16 floors. Look at this. I don't think we'll be taking the elevator. Yikes. That's a long way down. The people that went up on top of this roof and stood there on the day of the explosion all died because they all got lethal doses of radiation, I read. So we were standing right there. It's pretty cool. Here's a little Khrushchevite apartment. One kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. There's a tub, another bedroom. Right there. On the 12th floor. The town of Pripyat once held 50,000 people, and today it's one of the world's most famous ghost towns. The people who left there all thought they were coming back very soon, but in reality, they never went back. So the place got left as if the whole town got raptured or something. Now, since then, thieves and vandals have ransacked the whole town, which really doesn't seem very smart considering everything in that town was super hot with radiation. We were only allowed to spend an hour there in Pripyat and were told not to touch anything. But I guess what surprised me the most was just how fast nature has rebounded after the event. The flora and fauna around Chernobyl are seemingly as healthy and vibrant as ever. When I was there the first time, they were just getting started on the new sarcophagus that would eventually cover the damaged reactor in 2017. And I was struck by the lack of security there. I ended up writing about it in my novel, which you can get a copy of at Amazon.com or by subscribing to the podcast over at Patreon.com/HotZone. I'll send you a free copy. It's called Meltdown, and it's part of a fiction trilogy that I wrote back in 2017 or so. Anyway, in the novel, terrorists hatch a plot to blow up the damaged reactor because the amount of radioactive material still in there could make much of Europe uninhabitable. When you watch the show, you can get a sense of just how close they came back in 1986 to turning Europe into a nuclear winter wonderland and possibly killing millions of people. It's really a miracle of God that didn't happen, to tell you the truth. My second trip to Chernobyl was back in 2016, and I talked more about that threat then. Check out this excerpt of the piece.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia.
Experts tonight say the cloud of radiation is now dissipating over the North Atlantic and poses no further threat to anyone. But as the Soviets treat an unknown number of casualties, there's no way to say how much lasting damage that cloud may have already caused.
On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukraine exploded in what would become the worst nuclear accident in history. A combination of ignorance and complacency led to the disaster, which experts say released radiation equivalent to 10 Hiroshima bombs. Here at the Kremlin, however, in Moscow, Soviet leaders waited a full 3 weeks before letting the world in on the full extent of the disaster. And Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev lived to regret that decision. In fact, that regret may just have changed the world. A sudden power spike caused the reactor to rupture, spewing highly radioactive material into the atmosphere. This led to fallout as far away as Scandinavia. In the immediate area, more than 350,000 people were evacuated from their homes. Hundreds of first responders, called liquidators, were brought in to fight the fire, and many received lethal doses of radiation. When it became clear to the global community that the Russians had been less than forthright in alerting Europe to the true extent of the damage, international pressure to adopt a more transparent system caused President Mikhail Gorbachev to call the disaster a historic turning point. The staggering cost of the cleanup also accelerated the fall of the Soviet Union. This is the city of Pripyat. It's about 3 kilometers away from the Chernobyl nuclear plant. It was built to house the workers for the plant as a model city. And when the accident happened in 1986, 2 days later, they came in here and evacuated everybody in the space of 3 hours. They told them just to take a few things because they'd be back in a day or two. But in reality, they never returned. Some smaller villages were so highly radioactive that they had to be plowed under. But nature is slowly reclaiming Pripyat, now one of the world's most famous ghost towns. Vandals have destroyed much of what was here, looking for anything of value. But despite the ruin and decay, the city still gives a sense of what life was like in the former Soviet Union. In the intervening 25 years, local wildlife and forests have proven their resilience. But experts warn the area won't be safe for human habitation for another 20,000 years. Incredibly, the other 3 reactors at the Chernobyl site continue to operate even after the accident. Because of the radiation level, the employees there were only able to work between 5 minutes and 5 hours per day. The entire site was finally decommissioned in the year 2000. I'm here in front of reactor 4. This is the one that exploded back in 1986. And you can see the sarcophagus that was built over top of it to try to contain the volatile nuclear material that's inside. You can hear that beeping going off here on my watch, perhaps. This is a watch made by MTM Special Ops. It has a Geiger counter inside, and the alarm's going off because it's showing the radiation level here to be about 40 times normal. But you can imagine that if that old sarcophagus were to collapse, there's enough nuclear material inside to kill over 100 million people. That would create a disaster across Europe that would make a lot of Europe uninhabitable. So they're building a new structure here that they plan to roll over top of the old structure to try to contain it. Unfortunately, that's about 10 years behind schedule. It's going to cost over $1 billion to finish.
The United States has more nuclear power plants than any other country. Almost 20% of America's total power needs are supplied by 100 nuclear reactors. But environmental concerns have put a stop to most new construction for almost 40 years. In fact, no new reactors have been brought online since 1977, but the demand is rising fast.
Now, I highly recommend the HBO series. One of the best parts of the whole thing is a small speech by the main scientist that he gives at the end, in which he says, quote, "Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth, and sooner or later that debt is paid."
To be a scientist is to be naive. We are so focused on our search for truth, we fail to consider how few actually want us to find it. But it is always there, whether we see it or not, whether we choose to or not. The truth doesn't care about our needs or wants. It doesn't care about our governments, our ideologies, our religions. It will lie in wait for all time. And this, at last, is the gift of Chernobyl. Where I once would fear the cost of truth, now I only ask, what is the cost of lies?
Tremendous food for thought. The tragedy at Chernobyl shows that bureaucracy breeds mediocrity and carelessness. It magnifies the worst parts of human nature. It's one of the reasons I'm so much of an advocate for the individual charity as opposed to government welfare programs. The only thing that government does really well is screw things up in the most expensive way possible. And I think most people would agree on that. There's no better example of that than Chernobyl. Well, that's all I have for today, folks. Thanks for watching. If you listen to the podcast and would like to watch it, I'd encourage you to go over to opslens.com to see it over there, or just find us on YouTube. Just search for the Hot Zone podcast with Chuck Holton. Well, I hope to see you back again tomorrow. Have a great day.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.